And welcome officially, everyone. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Hunt Institute, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon for today's conversation on strengthening our educated workforce. Across the country, states are navigating ongoing challenges in both recruitment and supporting teachers, but also this other bucket of retention around retaining teachers and school leaders. How do we make sure that those investments that we put into recruiting our teachers are actually returned via long-term sustained careers in support of our student success? We know these issues can't be solved with short-term fixes, but yet they require sustained innovative strategies and collaboration across sector, which is why this panel is not only so important, but also so incredible. You'll hear shortly from a broad spectrum of education leaders, from state policy to nonprofit and community leadership to those actually guiding our national priorities in the legislature. And so today they'll reflect the range of stakeholders who we actually need to build a system of a strong, sustained educator pipeline from the communities to the classrooms and back to the communities so that every community has an excellent teacher, excellent teacher workforce in their school districts. So during our time together, we'll explore practical cross-sector approaches to both talent recruitment, leadership development, and educator well-being, and how these strategies can be adapted and scaled across states. So thank you again for joining us. I'm excited to turn this over to our moderator today, Dr. Milton J. Perkins with Act One Services. So I'll turn over to him to lead us through this great conversation and enjoy what will absolutely be a really innovative and really successful conversation. And again, I'd encourage you if you go throughout this process to utilize the Q&A function to submit any questions that you will have. So you'll hear a bit from our panel, and then you'll have about 25 minutes or so to engage in Q&A with these great panelists. So on the bottom of your panel, if you've identified, you see a question mark. Under that, you'll see Q&A. Feel free to utilize that for any questions that you already have or questions that come to mind as our panelists discuss certain things. That way, they can absolutely answer those questions. We'll make sure to get to many of those questions as possible. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Perkins.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you guys being here, spending your part of your afternoon, evening, and depending where you are, it might be morning, with us. Building a sustainable workforce, the power of partnerships. Why is this even important? As academicians, everything is research-based, according to Frontline Education and Hanover Research. There's tens of thousands of unfilled teaching positions nationwide, and many of those roles are staffed by unqualified educators. According to Hanover specifically, and I know this particularly because I've done some consulting in the public sector space, since the pandemic, there's been hundreds of thousands of teachers to leave the classroom. Hanover states about 33% of the current teacher workforce are likely to leave the profession within the next 2 years, which is a huge increase since the pandemic. Replacing a teacher, think about this from a budgetary standpoint, can cost upwards of $20,000 to replace a teacher. That's total cost. The external talent partnership gives your institutions, and just generally speaking, any educational institution, a competitive advantage by providing some expertise, broader candidate networks, and objective strategies to address teacher shortages, high turnover, helping the districts attract, engage, and retain, quality educators. Just a bit about myself before we get into this illustrious panel. I am the Senior Vice President of a company called Act One Government Solutions, part of the Act One Group, and we provide staffing solutions to government organizations to include public schools. We have 225 offices nationwide, and we are in 19 countries. We have HR consulting as an offer, which helps organizations transform their workplace to that of being more inclusive, civil, and merit-based outcomes. We do leadership development. We even are so embedded into the world of AI, we bought an AI company. So we have something called agentic AI solutions that help you become more efficient and effective. I've been in the human capital space for about 45 years, and I'm the primary SME, one of the primary subject matter experts to the Society of Human Resource Management and to the Public Sector HR Association. I do public speaking, and I'm an edutainer, not educator or entertainer, but an edutainer. So I'm a member of the Kings and Queens of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which is a roadshow, and I'm an author of a book called Scratching the Darn Scars of Diversity. Today's panel brings together a distinguished group of experts who are tackling one of the most pressing challenges in education. That is of attracting and retaining talent in K through 12, either from a policy perspective or a consulting perspective. And you'll hear from the panel shortly. Joining us, we have the state of Hawaii's legislative representative, the Honorable Julie Reyes Oda. We have Miss Eliana Afante, New York's Assistant Secretary for Education. And we have Mr. Harrison Peters, founder and CEO of MCEL, which is Men of Color in Education. I'm going to turn over the mic briefly to each of them for them to provide us a little bit more details about who they are, their connection to the K-12 environment, to include, why do you think recruiting a strong workforce is important? Representative Oda, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. I'm Representative Julie Reyes Oda of Hawaii, and I am a newly elected representative who was a teacher last year. So I taught for nearly 20 years. Let me start by telling you guys a little bit about, actually the whole thing will be about where we come from, because it's important where I come from for us to be able to place people. I'm the daughter of parents who grew up on the sugar plantations. We still had them into the 2000s. Their education was, my mother graduated from high school, and my grandfather, my father didn't graduate. He went to, I think, 8th grade, and then he dropped out to work. My grandparents, all four of them were plantation workers. And I consider myself very lucky. I'm very lucky that I got to go to college. And I'm lucky to become a teacher, but also that I had a career before teaching, because I started teaching at about 30. Like maybe a week or so before I turned 30, I got my first contract. I taught high school. I taught at the community college. I taught at the kids lockup. And lastly, I went back in for almost 9-10 years at Nanakuli, which is on Hawaiian homestead land. So that area is all surrounded by Hawaiian homesteading land. And it's the school that had the highest percentage of Native Hawaiian students. When we used to rank schools, my school was the lowest, if not the lowest of the ranking every single year that we had it. We don't rank it anymore. And so, coming back in to, I left and came back into the schools about 10 years. And then I started teaching again in K through 12. With that, I started seeing conditions in teaching that I think that the college instructors would never be okay with. So, things like not having any prep time, teaching for 6-7 hours in a day, practically straight. And so I used to do a lot of testimony at the Board of Ed. We're the only statewide school system. So luckily I only have to testify at one Board of Ed, because that's all of us. And with that, I ended up running for office in 2022, and I ended up winning in 2024. What I realized is that my job as a teacher was political, and things like our working conditions, even though they said it was negotiated through contract and bargaining, still some items went through the ledge. Our funding went through the ledge. A lot of policy ended up going through the Board of Ed, but I ended up moving more towards the ledge when we had to talk about money, because money really controls everything. And so that's kind of how I ended up getting here. And I am sitting here again and writing a lot of bills that have to do with teaching and teachers specifically, and try to make things better for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Ms. Infante, the same. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, and why do you think in recruiting a strong workforce is important to the world, actually?
Oh, that's a tall charge. My name is Ileana Infante. I am the Assistant Secretary for Education for Governor Hochul's administration. I actually am first and foremost an educator. That was my first role. And then after that, I worked in philanthropy and not-for-profits, always with the lens of education and making education a better setting for children and families. Currently, New York State is facing the need for 180,000 new teachers in the next decade. So the governor's office has been partnering not only with community-based organizations, but with the New York State Education Department and CUNY and SUNY to really think closely and carefully and strategically of how we are going to be able to meet that need within the next decade. We're looking at ways with teacher residencies, targeted programs, grow your own programs to really, one, recruit and retain. One of the challenges that we're having in education is the inability to really retain teachers for the long term. And we have a leaky bucket. And how do you support schools and districts to be able to put the plug on that bucket in order to keep teachers for the long term? And there are many different strategies and programs and partnerships that we're trying to address and fund in order to make those programs successful. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Last but not least, Mr. Peters, MCEL.
There's a time where the subject of educator diversity was really sexy and really appealing. Obviously, the need for a diverse educator workforce, still exists. The conversation seems to have lost its luster. But what I will say just off the top, I appreciate the Hunt Institute for keeping this very important issue front and center, where other organizations have sort of put it to the side. I want to thank the Institute for that. We live in a country where 40% of schools have no educators of color. That's striking to me because the opposite of that is over half the students that we serve in this country identify as a student of color. So I'm Harrison Peters, CEO of MCEL, and we work across the country to strengthen the educator workforce. We understand that leadership is a critical component. So our focus is on leadership because my two colleagues said previously, teachers make the magic happen. There is no replacement for what happens in that classroom with the teacher and those students. Teachers come and go because they have great leaders. So our work is how do we create a workforce of amazing, well-designed, well-supported leaders so they can support the great things that are happening in classrooms. I started out as a fourth and fifth grade teacher in the city of Orlando, Florida. And I was in Orlando for 10 years and left and went to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was a high school principal. After Charlotte, I spent about 5 years on the south side of Chicago, where I was a chief of schools, principal supervisor, supported about 40, 50, 60 schools across the south side of Chicago. After that, transitioned to the city of Houston, where we worked for Houston ISD as a high school transformation officer, doing some really good high school transformation turnaround work. After Houston, landed in Tampa as a deputy superintendent chief of schools. While I was in Tampa, I was tapped by the commissioner and the governor for the state of Rhode Island to be the state turnaround superintendent. So I went to Providence Public Schools and I did some great turnaround work. After that, returned to Florida, where we really leaned into this idea of educator diversity from the focus of male leaders of color. And at the end of the day, we know that representation matters. And we talk about this. One of the things that we don't always talk about, we know that students of color benefit greatly from an a diverse educator workforce. What we don't always say is, and white students also benefit from a diverse educator workforce. So the data is qualitative, it's quantitative. Most businesses will tell you that a diverse workforce is good for business. And I think that's a lesson that we need to continue to learn and reinforce and act upon in education.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Thank you, Harrison. And you and I have talked about this topic ad nauseum. I've consulted to school systems on the last topic he brought up. And students just, one of the measurements of schools matriculation rate, et cetera. But it goes beyond that. You touch students where they are, and they thrive. As an employer, I'm going to say, why is it important to recruit a strong workforce, especially that mirrors the student population? Is because you make the students better, and I have to employ them. So please, I beg of you, get help wherever you need help, to create an environment where your students are going to be successful. And Harrison knows this story. I had a teacher touch me, not unlike my parents, or parent, unlike my siblings, unlike my friends and their parents. A teacher saved my life. She looked like me. She knew where I came from, and she saw me behind my sunglasses as I was trying to be a cool high school football player. And she grabbed my face. She spoke to me in a quiet voice, and she touched me. As a result, ended up in this trajectory where now I'm Dr. Milton Perkins, have a doctor kid, two doctor kids, and a doctor significant other. So, you guys, the work that you do is important. So as we look at the national need for educators, each of you working to support educators and students in your own way and own right, I'm going to pose some questions to each of our panels independently. You guys in the audience, remember, start thinking about your questions as you hear answers. Put them in the link at the bottom of your screen. And this first question is going to be for Representative Reyes Oda. You started as an educator, now you find yourself as a legislator, advocating for the needs of students. Hawaii is also one of the most diverse educator workforces in our country. How has that dynamic played into the cultural, linguistic, and historical preservation of Hawaii's story?
So I think the biggest thing is we should thank the Constitutional Convention in 1978 for putting into our state constitution the requirement for public education to educate on Hawaiian culture, Hawaiian history, and Hawaiian language. We're the only state in the entire United States that has two official languages. So there's English and Hawaiian. If you ever receive any of our letterheads or anything from our state offices, and pretty much everything, it'll be translated in Hawaiian. So even in the governor's office, the letterhead will say Office of the Governor, and it'll say that in Hawaiian underneath. So it is important for us that we do all of those things. I know in the city, they're trying to even change the street signs to make sure that they're grammatically correct with all the diacriticals and things there. And so here we even do things like Hawaiian immersion schools, where they teach in Hawaiian up until 5th grade, where they introduce English. And even our court systems have confirmed that it is the state's requirement. So as far as for myself, what I have pushed for bills in is I've pushed for one about creating a Hawaiian immersion school in our Leeward district, because the Hawaiians are concentrated primarily in that district. The census numbers have shown it since 2023. But the schools for Hawaiian immersion are far away. We also have charters and traditionals. I'm trying to hope that we focus on traditionals because they're funded, that way. I think a big thing on teacher workforce is working conditions before anything else. And I heard the nurses talk about nurse to patient ratio, and I put one in about student to teacher ratio, because that's a working condition. It's different when you have a class of 40 kids and if you have a class of 20 kids. It is a working condition, and it's something that is not something the employer should be able to change constantly. But I think that we concentrate a lot on salary. I still give testimony at the Board of Ed. I can't help myself. I just did it a couple weeks ago, and I did it a month ago when it was about the teacher salary study, because all we talked about when it was about teachers on how do we retain teachers, the only discussion was about money. And everybody that I know who left the teaching profession did not leave because of money. They left because they didn't like the job. And so I told them that they needed to get away from the quantitative analysis and talk about the qualitative analysis, because these are human beings. Why don't they like the job? And ask people who are there when they're still there, why don't they like the job, so you can change it while you fix it, rather than trying to change it from people who already left. So I think it's also important for us to change it so people stay that are already here, rather than trying to chase people for reasons after they leave. We're an island state, so we can't go in between states and people can't drive to us. If you want to work in Hawaii, you got to live here. And it's a commitment. 2,500 miles till you get to another state.
Yeah, and I think you spoke to this. I think you can confirm or disconfirm this. There is a brain drain in Hawaii. So I'm assuming that there's a shifting demographic, understanding that the kind of the ethnicity of Hawaiians is not a monolith. So you guys are becoming much more diverse as well. And is the student population becoming just as more? Is there a changing in the demographics there as well? So to that end, you may have already spoken to this. What is the importance of the superintendent's office in looking at a workforce that maybe mirrors more of the demographics of the students and maybe the demographics of the state?
So trying to find teachers is hard. Then trying to find Native Hawaiian teachers might be harder. And even when I talked about like immersion, finding teachers who speak Hawaiian language is going to be very hard to do, especially even when the work that you do is not published. You would have to create everything on your own. The census has shown for the last couple of years that more Native Hawaiians live outside of our state. So they live in, Washington, California, Texas, all over the place. That majority of them live outside of our state. So to even say that when we're talking about Hawaiians, if they're leaving, it's hard to get them back because it's cheaper. You can buy a house for 200 something thousand. You can buy a house for seven. Here you can buy an apartment for, 1.5 million. And that would not be uncommon. And so I think, when we're talking about the cost of living, that's going to be a huge discussion for us when it comes to teachers, because, teachers spend a lot of time to be prepared and go through college to do this. They didn't go through all of that to get a professional job to live in their parents' house for the next 30 years.
Right.
So, yeah, for that, I think a huge part, and that's a salary issue, but then there's also the working condition issue, that it needs to be a job that is appreciative, and not only appreciative in pay, but that you understand that there's work and they shouldn't be working for 12 hours, every single day to be able to get the work done.
Okay. Let me jump all the way across, not 2,500 miles from you, but maybe 5,000 miles from you, over to Ms. Infante. As someone who has made a career in building quality educators, what are some essential components to recruitment and retention? And I think the representative alluded to some. I don't know if it's the same in New York State, but some of the essential components to recruitment and retention before teacher candidates even make it into the educator workforce.
That's an excellent question. As a former educator, I started my career as a teacher. I did a lot of thinking of what were the support systems that eventually led me to be successful and complete my program and become a teacher. And I think interest starts early. And usually students start to demonstrate an interest in becoming an educator or being a teacher and interested in that role in high school. And we haven't developed good mechanisms to really tap into that interest really early on. And then once that interest is nurtured and they go into schools, APP, educator preparation programs. In New York State, you have to have a bachelor's degree in order to have an initial certification. So first is the educational piece before they get to the workforce, and for them to be successful and to complete it. And then it's the other pieces of the certification exams, which is it can be a costly expense for students. That can be also a deterrent of the cost to become an educator. And then we have to have New York State is one of 2 states in the country that requires a master's program in order for you to achieve professional certification. The other state is Connecticut. So we're the only 2 states that require a master's degree in order to achieve professional certification in the field. So these are there are definitely opportunities because you're getting an educated pipeline of teachers into the classroom, but at the same time, in achieving those requirements, it's costly. because teachers have to really pay for the exams, get fingerprinted, pay for their master's program. The average master's program in New York State can cost you $33,000. So it is a cost. And then, as Representative Reyes Oda has mentioned, there is the issue of affordability. Does it make sense? If I become a teacher, is it financially viable for me to live on the salary that I'm going to make as an educator? Even though,
You
go
you
ahead.
might be empowered to do something that I'm going to mention. If we historically have put quantitative requirements to candidates coming into the classroom, you can affect probably policy in the state of New York to say, look, let's build our talent. I'll give you an example. When you go to the human store to shop for talent, only about 40% of the nation has an undergraduate degree. So you've eliminated 60% of the people on the human store shelves when you go to shop. So are we doing ourselves a disservice by saying, hey, we have these requirements out here, quantitative requirements to be in the classroom? To that end, what could you think about, or what could you recommend to our audience as collaborative efforts at a local and regional level where they could partner to align educator prep programs with the evolving labor market qualifications and the needs of the school systems?
Well, that work is already being done. I think in New York State, we are partnering with New York State Education Department to really think closely and look at these requirements, such as the undergraduate degree, the master's degree, and are there alternatives? There is now teacher residencies. Are there ways that we can extend the time frame for a student or candidate to get a master's degree? So I think that there are conversations that are being had, because we know that these requirements, these tangible requirements that we require teachers to have in order to get into the classroom, are perhaps not serving us really well in really trying to meet the 180,000 teachers that we're going to need in the next decade. So those conversations are happening, but like any agency, as you will know, there definitely are bureaucracies and stakeholders that we have to work with in order to make those changes in regulations. So in terms of partnering, there's an excellent example, which I always like to highlight, is New York City Men's Teach initiative that has happened in New York City. It is an initiative that has happened within the mayor's office, the CUNY, and City University of New York, and the New York City public school system. And it's been a partnership for the last 10 years. And their goal has always been to increase the number of colored men in classrooms. And it has been enormously successful. But that's been strategic. There has been a huge commitment, independent of administration, for this program to really leverage its goals and its objectives in the last 10 years, which speaks volumes to the commitment of the people that have been leveraging that partnership. And hopefully it serves as a model for other districts in New York State in order to build these kinds of partnerships, to really be very focused and strategic. One of the things about teacher diversity, trying to recruit for a diverse workforce, is that this doesn't happen haphazardly. It has to be thoughtful, it has to be intentional, and it has to be strategic. It cannot be something that's just going to happen because we have the wishfulness that it's going to happen. We all have to work together across party lines and across agencies and across and with different stakeholders that may not think alike with us, if we are going to really have a really robust, diverse workforce in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good segue to talking to Mr. Harrison Peters. And maybe he's done work with you guys, because you sound like your partnership is right up his alley. So, Harrison, you've not only paved the way for educators as a school and state leader, you've been in the administration, you've been in the classroom, principal, middle school, high school, you've been all over the school. Can you share a little bit about what would happen to the workforce, particularly to our males of color, if targeted interventions are not levied at the state, district, and even at the local, in school district level?
Yeah, what could happen? Actually, what is happening? We are approaching this extinction level event with male educators of color. Currently, we sit at less than 3% of the workforce. We're leaving faster than any other demographic, and fewer of us are even choosing education as a viable option. Coupled with this idea a few years ago, NASSP put out a poll that 40% of secondary principals are leaving in the next few years, and we're starting to see that. And I think one of our panelists said something about that earlier. And then there's this interesting study out of Vanderbilt. If you're a Black male teacher, what that study determined, if you're a Black male teacher, your performance appraisal, your annual evaluation is lower than your white counterparts. And that's even when you're equally credentialed. And it's even when your students score at or above the same level of your counterpart students. So there's this thing that's happening with male educators of color. And that's the thing that we have to really begin to unpack. And that's where our work sort of intersects with the work that everybody on this panel is talking about. If we don't intervene now, Dr. Milton, we will reach an extinction level event within the next decade. The other part of that is, well, why does that matter? Why should we be investing in male leaders of color? Well, we also know when we have leaders of color in our schools, community engagement is higher. We also know that our most marginalized students feel safer when we have leaders of color. We hire, retain, recruit teachers of color at a higher level. Quite frankly, when we have leaders of color in our schools, outcomes are higher. Reading and math scores are higher. We have more access to gifted and talented advanced placement courses. There's so much evidence to support a diverse educator workforce. One of the things that we do that I think is critically important and it's noteworthy of mentioning is this idea of how males of color enter into the profession. And I use myself as a vignette. So I was lucky enough to be a 4th and 5th grade teacher, and I was hired on the same day as a delightful young lady named Kristen. Kristen happens to identify as a white female. Well, like most elementary teachers do, in pre-planning, you go to the principal's office and you get your roster of students. So we walked to the principal's office and both of us got a roster of 23 students. No harm, no foul. The next activity was you walk to the assistant principal's office and you get your duty roster. This is where things started to diverge very quickly. So when you look at Kristen's roster, she was in charge of the reading program, lesson plans, grade level team meetings. She was on the school improvement, like really strong, powerful, academically focused responsibilities. When you look at my responsibilities, I was the timeout coach, Saturday school. I did the Black History play, like all of those operational things. Now, there isn't anything wrong with that, but what it did, it put me on this operational track. And when I was ready, or I thought I was ready to move up, it was really clear that I didn't have the requisite instructional leadership skills to be able to lobby. So one of the things that we do is think about like, how are we actually positioning our males of color to be able to lead instruction, to be the instructional leaders that we want. Teachers don't get better by themselves. They don't. No one gets better by themselves. They need great leaders and great support systems to be able to pour into them, to be able to bring their voice out. And I said earlier that teachers, if I were in the classroom, and most teachers will tell you, I'll drive all the way across town to work for a leader that gives me voice, that gives me agency, that gives me some decision-making authority, but I wouldn't walk across the street to work for a leader that doesn't empower me. That doesn't give me this sense of belonging. So this idea of solving for this teacher crisis, we believe, is strongly wrapped up in solving for growing and developing and solving this leader crisis.
And you know what, and I don't know if people think about this. Nothing happens sans a human. All of the people, the students are humans. All of the faculty and staff are humans. The demographics of the United States, it didn't change overnight in a revolutionary way. It evolved to being very, very diverse. And Generation Y and Z, which is probably where most of the educators are coming from, those are the two most diverse. They constitute, Ys and Zs constitute about 60% of the labor market. They are the most demographically diverse generations in the history of the country. We
Yeah.
didn't pay attention to it, but they come to the table saying, I want something different. And Representative Oda mentioned it. It's not just about money. I need a different experience with you. I'm going to quick fast forward to a follow-up question to you. Do you have access, and maybe some of our listeners can just, at the end, we can put our individual contact information in the chat box. Do you have access or ideas on how districts can partner to prepare some of that otherness in the labor market, the men of color,
Yeah.
to assume these roles, apprenticeship, paid residencies, tuition support? I don't know what the ideas are. You're the expert of that, of men of color in leadership. So
All of those things you mentioned, all of those things Ileana talked about, all of those things that Representative Oda, it's not one thing. And I think as educators, we've got to also think about this idea. And I want to take us back to COVID, where we promised our children that we would never go back to where we were. We promised them that we would reimagine education. We promised them that we would bring opportunity to the forefront. We promised them that they would have this sense of belonging and what they needed to be successful. And I worry that we still haven't made good on that promise. Doc, you said something a few minutes ago that I think is critically important. The workforce is very different now. Right now, there are
Yes.
4 generations in a workforce. And as a leader and a manager, you have to understand how to navigate those workforces. The other thing is, a lot of times in education, we're quick to teach, but we're slow to learn. We have to understand that we can't put the round peg in the square hole anymore. Educators, young folks aren't staying 30 years in the profession like we did, like our parents did. They want very different things from their jobs. They want very different things socially. They want very different things from their leaders. So part of what I think we have to be as systems are nimble enough to understand what are the needs of this new age workforce. It may not be getting a certification. There's a lot of data, and I know I tick a lot of people off when I say this. There's a lot of data that supports your certification doesn't necessarily align with your effectiveness. Now, I'm not anti-certification. I think that the standard is the standard. I agree with all of that. But for that to be the determining factor of where I can be a great teacher or not, I think there needs to be a conversation. So to answer your question, it's all of those things. And finally, for the work that we do, we've created an entire playbook for aspiring and current leaders of color to understand that the rules are very different for them. In the early 1900s, the Jewish community, they had this book called the Jewish Vacation Guide. And our Jewish family used this vacation guide to navigate the United States because we just weren't kind to our Jewish family. Well, in the early 1940s, a Black mail carrier from Harlan took that Jewish vacation guide and created the Negro Travel Guide. And that Negro Travel Guide, or the Green Book, did the same thing as it did with our Jewish. It helped us navigate a time where this sense of belonging, the sense of the sense of belonging it wasn't there for Black folks. So for instance, if I'm leaving Tampa, Florida, and I'm trying to drive to St. Louis, that Green Book will tell me safe routes. It will let me know where I can eat, where I can get my car fixed. It let me know the towns that I need to get out of before the sun goes down. The reason that I share that, it literally became a book of survival for Black folks. Well, when we talk to leaders of color across the country, the systems aren't designed for them to be successful. So we've created this leadership survival guide called the Resilient Representative Leadership Framework that helps leaders of color navigate the spaces that aren't designed for them to be successful. But we just don't stop at the leaders. There's also tools for the actual system to sort of self-reflect. Are we creating the conditions in our organization for leaders of color to feel seen, to feel this sense of belonging? So I would pile that on top of everything that my my colleagues have said, the residencies, the tuition assistants, and with a lot of males of color, and I'll be quiet, that are heads of the house, sometimes it's difficult to take care of family on a teacher salary. So we also have to be mindful of sort of that social construct as well.
All right, thank you, thank you, thank you. And to those of you who've joined us today, just a reminder, please note after this next final question to the panel, we'll allot some time for Q&A for you guys. To that end, please begin to formulate some of your questions. I think there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You type them in, and then the facilitators will help get those questions posed to the panel. To all of you guys, specifically to Eliana and Representative Oda, teachers and leaders are most important. They are the most important assets in the school when it comes to predicting student outcomes. I stand as a testament to that. If that teacher would not have stopped me, I would not be here. I would either be in the penitentiary or dead if that teacher didn't grab me by my face and talk to me the way she did. She touched me where I needed to be touched and literally saved my life. And I'm in touch with her to this day. To this day, we keep in touch. So given your collective experiences, what is a policy lever, model, or practice that you want to point the audience to that we can think about paving the way for the next generation of educators to not only enter into the profession and thrive, but to stay in the profession? Well, it's a policy level, a model, or a practice you want to point the audience to.
I think what somebody had said earlier when it was mentioned that teachers are humans, I had actually wrote that down, before. And that as a teacher, I think for anybody who's listening who's been a teacher, my choice to do this career has been a family career. It's like a little circus where at the start of the school year, I get my kids and they'd come and be in the classroom and help me clean up and move the things around. And at the end of the year, my kids and my family and everybody else has to come and help me clean up, move things. It's a family annual event that we do. And it's a commitment for everybody to participate in my job. And when I worked in my other fields, in banking, my kids never came to my work and showed up and started moving furniture around. It would look crazy, but in my career, it did. So I try to think like, why do teachers come there and how can we value their experience? And I think one is that teaching is a ladderless career. Like, what can you be if you're a good teacher? If you are a good teacher, you have shown to do good work and you've been 20 years, what would your promotion be? And for somebody like me, I don't want to be admin. So admin is not a promotion. It's a different ladder. It's asking me to climb up a different ladder and do something else. How can you look at a good teacher and say, like, we want to be able to multiply this and share your experience? And I think that's something is creating like different teaching pathways, and that the pathway isn't to become an administrator. Like, how do we do that? And how do we not only honor them, but then that also comes with other things too, like pay, like with time, like you have to be able to get better at doing what you're doing. And that can't be standing in a classroom for 7 hours a day. You might have to be able to leave and go do something else. So I think we need to look at that and look at like giving the teacher experience and being able to do that, and not that they're babysitters all day in front of a class with kids. So somehow, and I don't know how to articulate that here, but I want to be able to honor that and to be able to get teachers to share their own experiences. And for us, it's local because we can't get them from anywhere else unless we pay somebody to fly to our state, for them to be able to do that. I want to be able to create something that we can do that with. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would add national board certification, because national board certification is a very rigorous exercise where the teacher is really taking his or her classroom and being able for a year's length. One, you have to know who you're teaching. You really have to get to know your students. What is the demographics? Where do they come from? Who has special needs? Who is an English language learner? Then you have to develop lessons and implement those lessons and assess those lessons, whether those students learned. And it's a very rigorous analytical process of your practice of the day-to-day. And like Harrison mentioned earlier, usually certification exams don't necessarily equate that you're an effective teacher.
Right.
The rigor of the national board certification is such a analytical, self-evaluative process where actually other colleagues of yours in a classroom in the school have to give you feedback, that it really makes you a much better teacher. And research shows that students who are taught by a national board certified teacher, there's actually better student outcomes. So if that is something that I would direct my audience, if whether they're teachers, administrators, superintendents, this is it's about $1,900. So it is a costly exercise, but there are states that give you merit raises when you do become a national board certified teacher. And I think it's an activity, like when you become a surgeon, it's not just about the pedagogy, it's not just about the theory, but you have to really demonstrate in a clinical practice that you are able to do the work that you're intended to do once you become board certified. And national board certification provides that exercise, but that you have to demonstrate all the skill sets that you need to be a really effective teacher in a classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to do this. Harrison, if you don't mind, I'm going to allow for the questions that were posed by some of our participants. So one, Rebecca Shipper stated, I'm sure you will answer this at some point, but I would love to know the inputs we are investing in ensuring that our communities of practice, our schools, are places where adults feel like they belong. How are we ensuring that we are investing in adult cultures? I'm going to pause there. What recommendations or suggestions or experiences
Doc,
do you have? Go ahead.
I used to have very spirited conversations with our labor partners. And one of the things that they would always say is student learning conditions are teacher working conditions, and they go hand in hand, and you cannot deny the power of that. You talked about policies earlier. First of all, I think from the federal perspective, we have to collect data on educator diversity. This conversation is about educator diversity. So one of the things is, do we have strong data systems to know what our teaching workforce looks like? Every state doesn't collect this data. Every district doesn't collect this data. So federally, can we require districts or states to collect this data? And can states require districts to even collect this data to see if these are even challenges in your area? Then collecting this data, my colleagues have already said it, how can we create and fund these apprenticeships, these residencies, teacher certifications? How can we fund national board certification? Like, we have to purse our priorities. So if we say these things are critically important to us, it typically shows up in the way that we fund the program. The other piece is that we've not talked about, and I get myself in trouble when I say this, so I'll say it quickly and be quiet. When we really want to change and get serious about changing and diversifying the educator workforce, we're gonna have to change the experiences that our children of color have in our schools. I cannot go back into a profession when I graduate when I was part of the fraternity that was suspended the most, or that was put in timeout the most, or that was excluded the most, or there was or labeled special ed. And you want me to come back and pour into the very institutions that took so much away. And this is not a broad stroke, but by and large, we know what the data is. The NAEP scores don't lie. The literacy scores don't lie. And I don't want to reduce our children to scores, but the reality is, if we really want to have the teacher workforce that we believe will develop and create the next generation of transformational kids, if we really want the workforce, Doc, that you've been looking to hire, then we're going to have to change the experiences that many of our children have. And that's not coming from me. That is coming from having conversations with children, with students across the country. So I think it's adult culture that we absolutely have to be proximal to, because our adults take care of our kids, but also understanding that the work that we do is the outcome of that are great citizens that we're putting in the community that's going to be paying for our retirement soon.
And you speak to, and I'm going to add some salt and pepper onto your answer, and it's going to address Rebecca and Eugene's answer as well. Some things you can do and some things you can work on from a cultural standpoint. Culture is literally the collective behaviors of your workforce. Those behaviors should be anchored on the values of the organization with accountability. So you have to define your values in word and in behavior, hold people accountable to those values, and it creates the culture. Here's the kicker. Generation Y and Z are stating it to you. If you look at the research, they're saying money is not the most important thing to me. What is most important is my experience when I come to places that you work. And if I don't have a good experience, know this between the generations. I'm a baby boomer. I am never going to leave a job without another job already in place, offer in hand. A Generation Z will quit today, 1 minute notice, bye-bye, Philippe, and they'll walk out the door. And it's amazing to me. So, but that's their reality. But they're telling you the culture is important. I don't want to work in a monolith environment. I want to work in an environment where it is diverse. If you do all of the things the research tell you, you become a magnet. You start attracting them. I will go with this, and this might be the last time we have a time for the question. Barbara Adams said teacher registered apprentices are gaining traction. I think Eliana spoke to the certifications. Do any of you guys see a pathway as an option to enhancing recruitment and retention in today's education system, maybe through those channels? If so, speak to it.
Well, in New York State, we are looking at teacher residencies and apprenticeship models in order to get teachers into the field. I think that what Harrison had mentioned earlier, as well as Representative Reyes Oda, one of the challenges is the regulatory requirements that are necessary in order to achieve certification, at least in New York State. Every state is different. Every state has very different requirements to become a teacher. Some states make it a little bit more flexible and nimble to become a teacher. But when you have very strict requirements, it makes it, even if you go through an apprenticeship or residency model, you still have to meet the regulatory requirements that the state has set forth. And that is probably one of the challenges that we are working with New York State Education Department. There have always been modifications to certification. When I came into the teaching profession in New York State, what we had was a national teacher, and it was known as the NTE, the National Teachers Examination, which was a very different exam than the current exams that we have currently, because I think they become more robust, more aligned with the certification that the teacher is seeking. But going back to Harrison's comment, just because you pass the certification exam doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be an effective teacher, or that you really know the content well, or that you're really going to connect with students.
Right.
Because teaching is we're humans, and it's like Vygotsky, a great philosopher. You have to be in that proximal zone. And to have that proximal zone with students, you have to have a social emotional connection with the students that are before you. So if you do not, you can have every certification in the world, but if you can't connect with kids, that's not going to do anything. At the end of the day, it is that connection, Dr. Perkins, that teacher put her hands around your face and actually led your life to be completely different. There was a social emotional connection.
Oh, for sure.
You and that educator.
Yep.
And that piece is integral to any teacher to be successful in his or her classroom.
Yeah. And it was a personal connection. So you know what? But I'm curious to know, maybe that is out of the Harrison playbook, some of the tools that he has at his disposal. To Barbara's question, those apprenticeship programs, or that is a pathway to recruitment, which was her question. The retention part is about your culture. When you change the environment and make it civil, belonging, enhanced, have access through merit, but you coach, counsel, and correct teachers from a place of love, not from a place of policy. You meet with the humans you're dealing with and you talk to them like humans. And I think that creates an environment where people, they want to stay. It's not just about a paycheck. They will want to stay. Any other panelists have anything else to add? If not, I'm going to turn it back over to the Hunt Institute because I know that camera came on because he's like, it's time. Drop the mic, Dr. P, shut the pie hole, and get off the stage. Any final thoughts, guys?
Yeah, can I add one thing? So I'm at a conference. I'm a former math teacher, and I was just in a math discussion before I came in. I came back to my room to have this discussion. And one of the things that was brought up was how in the United States, we think of teacher education programs. And they had mentioned, I don't know what country it was, but they said in other countries, they take content specialized people and they use teacher education programs is where they teach you how to teach. That's what they spend the time on. But they'll say in ours, they teach you the content too while they're there. And, they use their time for that. I think we need to think of it in that model when we're looking at things like CTE. We don't want to teach somebody how to fix a car when they're trying to learn how to teach. We rather get somebody who has been doing that job. And all we do is teach them the part that they need to teach kids and then get them out there because we need their content knowledge. And that's how we need to move them along. And I think for us, we have a CTE and I think special ed alternative way of getting it. And like Ileana mentioned earlier, it is state specific. So that's something that the states would have to discuss when they do their licensure or legislatively. I'm not sure, however, they do it that way. But thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for being great panelists. Back to the Hunt Institute. It is all yours, my friend. And thank you to the 70-something people that joined us today. Bless you guys. Happy, whatever you celebrate next week, happy that. And whatever you celebrate in December, have a happy one of those and Happy New Year. Everybody has those. So.
Well, thank you, Dr. Perkins. And thank you all, the 74 people who stayed on for the duration of the call. I think we certainly exceeded the 120 mark all in. But thank you all for sticking through from the beginning to the end to hear those questions, not only that you may have posed, but also the others may have posed, so you can learn even more. Really thankful for our incredible panel. So if you are with me virtually, please extend a virtual round of applause to each of them, as well as our moderator, for a lively and really informative and really nuanced conversation, that nuance is really important now more than ever. So really thankful for that. 2 quick housekeeping notes, and I'll send you on your way to allow you to have a great afternoon. The first, everything that you heard today, the notes, the resources that were mentioned, we will be compiling a key takeaways document, which will have not only a recording, which you'll receive shortly after this webinar closes. In the next week or two, you'll receive a document that has the notes from the conversation as well as links to any resources that were mentioned. For example, we had a question that was posed around what does this look like in the early childhood sector. So we'll make sure to link the resource that we shared with that as well as the resources and legislation that was mentioned throughout the duration of this call. Secondly, we have a couple of upcoming webinars that I want to draw your attention to that may be of interest. So following up with what the representative was talking about around thinking about how do we CTE programs in the workforce, on December the 4th, we have a post-secondary pathways webinar focused on navigating gainful employment in higher education. So really, how do we help evolve education, especially in the higher ed space and developing students for the workforce with the evolving job market that we have, so that college graduates will go on to be successfully employed in the future jobs of America. On December the 10th, we have a K-12 webinar, which will focus on supporting student mental health, which we know is a critical need now more than ever in our schools across the country in all contexts, all demographics. So that December the 10th will be on focusing on student mental health. And you'll get emails with all of these links to register for those, but you want to lift those up as well. Again, thank you all for your time this afternoon. We know that sustaining the educator workforce is incredibly important, and we thank you all for your insights there. I perused through the attendee list, so I know many of you are experts yourself. So if you would love to have a follow-up conversation with our team, as well as anyone on this panel, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to connect you with them. But until the next time we speak and see each other, have a great afternoon, and thank you again for your time. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.